notes through the hourglass. These are the songs of our lives.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Songs of Our Lives. I'm Brad Rose. I'm an artist, a composer, a writer, the founder of Foxy, Digitalis, and someone who thinks about music and sound far more than is healthy. Each week, I invite on a guest to talk about the music and the songs that have stuck with them and left their mark. Previous guests include Leah Cole, David Grubbs, Anna Butters, Tashi Wada, Jan Novak, Clarissa Maurice, M. Sage. Gosh, the list goes on and on. This week, I have Dialect on the show, also known as Andrew P.M. Hunt. And he has a new album coming out on September 20th called Atlas of Green on Revenge International, and it is an absolutely incredible record. One that, you know, when I think of all the things that like really interest me, like a lot of things interest me, but it's like, you know, this just like ticks all the boxes of like, oh my God, oh, it's this and this and this. So it's really fantastic. And the kind of story that it tells, I find it so engaging and sort of like immersive that I just kind of, when I'm listening to it, I really get like lost in this world that Andrew creates. And I'm a sucker for that kind of thing. So, I also was going to note that Andrew, when I have people on, you know, obviously before and after we're recording, we chat a little bit. And a previous guest had told me that Andrew was one of the people, he's like, I really, really want you, it's like selfishly want you to have him on because I just love his stuff. I think he's a really interesting guy. He's really, and so I had that in the back of my head when the new record got announced. I was like, oh man, perfect. And I'm so glad that I did, because this one was a blast. So we recorded this a little while ago, and we had some technical difficulties, but we made it through, and I don't think you'll even really notice that. So hope you all enjoy it. My guest today is a musician, a composer, a sample library maker. I don't know if that's the correct word, but I was going to ask you about that. Anyway, it is Andrew P.M. Hunt. It's Dialect. Woo! Welcome to the show. How's it going?
Fred. It's going good. I've had a quite intense morning trying to teach a sort of group guitar lesson to a bunch of, actually a bunch of kids, but a really mixed range of ages and abilities and interest levels. And so it was pretty chaotic.
Wow.
I'm feeling a little exhausted. I also think it made me realize I don't think I'm very good at it, to be honest.
Good at teaching the guitar, playing the guitar.
Yeah, no. Well, I think I'm okay at playing the guitar, but I think I'm not very good at teaching it, or at least not to people who are like, unless you're listening and super attentive and really, really want to learn the guitar. I think I'm maybe not that good. I don't know. It's hard. I mean, the thing with all children that I've ever met is that they all play the guitar. Yeah. They come up to you and they're just like, "Oh, I play the guitar," and you're like, "Oh, really? You're 5 years old? That's surprising." And then they just take it off you and then sort of proceed to just like punch it a little bit. And they're like, "Oh, okay, all right, okay, I see what we're dealing with here."
I see what you mean here.
Yeah, I see what you mean. That's great. Let's work on that. So it was kind of a quite intense morning, but you know, they're a bunch of cuties, really. So it's kind of quite fun.
Well, that I have one kid, and I haven't taught her how to play anything. Sometimes we've tried. She's learning to play the cello, which I can't teach her because I don't know how to play the cello. But
right,
just even watching, yeah. Good luck. That's all I can say. That seems like
yeah. I mean, it's I don't know how it was for you, but I had fairly musically inclined parents. I mean, they both played instruments, and they didn't really force music on me at all. But they played it a lot around, and it was sort of always there. And I developed a pretty strong interest in it fairly early on, but they sort of left me to it mostly. And let me just find my own way with it, which I think is great. I think, any kid needs to find their own angle on music, don't they? Their own reason for being interested in it. And if you're just telling people to do it or telling people to do it a certain way, it's an uphill battle unless you're incredibly disciplined or like you're a real disciplinarian.
Right. Yeah.
Which I'm not. I'll be honest. I'm not a disciplinarian.
No. I'm not either.
Softy.
No, when I was 10 or so, I started playing guitar when I was about 10. And like I'm the only person in my family who does anything with music or art.
Oh, right. Okay.
But I took lessons for about a month and I hated it because it was somebody telling me what to do and telling me you have to. So I just quit and taught myself, for better or worse, probably mostly for worse. But 30 years later, hey, I can still play. It sort of
led to me having like a bit of a problem with authority, though. I think I've realized over time. I hated that too. I had piano lessons for a bit. And I didn't like it because someone was telling me what to do. And I didn't really think they had my best interests at heart. Like, you're just sort of bullying me a bit. Like, right. You don't care if I get good at the piano or not. You just sort of care if my parents keep paying you to teach me the piano. So I would literally like hide from them in their house and try and like run away and like stow away somewhere in the house. It was like quite a adversarial relationship that we had.
Wow.
Yeah, but so since then I didn't really do so much in the way of that kind of organized music, but I got pretty into it on my own.
Well, this is a pretty awkward segue, but speaking of which, you have a new album coming out, which you probably mentioned.
Yes,
Atlas of Green, which is out
September.
on Revenge. Yeah. And I will say I absolutely love it. I think I've listened to it so many times. It's an album to me that is like so listenable, but so like every time it's like a new thing or something. It's great.
Oh, that's awesome. Thanks.
I am really curious. I would love to hear a little more about the concept and sort of how, because the framework of it is so my shit. For lack of a better word. And so I'm curious how like you ended up there.
So a couple of years ago, it was maybe 3 years ago now, I did a residency in this place called Bidston Observatory, which is an old astronomical observatory on the top of this big hill, this big sandstone hill, very close to where I grew up, and not so far away from where I live now. Which is in Liverpool, by the way, to anyone who's listening and doesn't know. And so I was there for 2 weeks in this old scientific building, which was on a hill that I had frequented a lot when I was a kid, basically. And it had been a big part of my sort of teenage mythology, really, this hill that the observatory was on. So I was quite thrilled to go there. And whilst I was doing this residency, I was kind of exploring using cassette tape loops and things like this, and also sort of experimenting with singing over the top of these cassettes. And I spent the 2 weeks sort of messing around with tape loops and also reading a bunch of sci-fi and fantasy, that some of which I found in the library that is. That was in this place. So I should say this observatory is now being run as a kind of artistic research center.
Oh, that's really cool.
By some very nice people, and they do these kind of residencies where they invite people to come and spend 2 weeks just sort of researching things and developing new ideas. So I spend quite a lot of the time in their library reading stuff like Ursula Le Guin, reading stuff like Gene Wolfe, and actually a guy, this Italian philosopher, Federico Campagna came to Bidston to give a talk there. So that was kind of my introduction to their ideas, which became also quite important along with this sort of sci-fi and fantasy in sort of forming this sort of fledgling idea for Atlas of Green. So I then went away and sort of those ideas percolated, I guess, over a couple of years, really. And I started getting asked to play shows, mostly in Europe, kind of out of nowhere, really. And which was great, but I didn't really have much of a live set. So I hadn't been playing very much. So I would go basically and just sort of present like work in progress in front of an audience, which was kind of terrifying in a way, but but really very helpful as it turned out. I would go and just sort of show the audience whatever I've been doing. I've been doing all this stuff with tape loops and singing, and sometimes I'd have a piano with me, sometimes I'd have a guitar, and I'd sort of just do 40 minutes of improvisation or sort of loose sketches of things I was working on. And then I'd come home from those gigs, and sometimes I'd record the gigs and kind of resample bits of them, or I'd stumble upon a section that had really worked and be like, oh, okay, that feels like something. And the whole time I was doing these shows and coming back to the studio to work on them, I was thinking about these books that I'd been reading, this sort of sci-fi literature that's somewhere between, Gene Wolfe, for instance, is very kind of like high fantasy sort of sword and sorcery kind of stuff, which it was kind of a new thing for me, really. I'd read a fair bit of sci-fi, but not really so much fantasy stuff. And then Ursula Le Guin, who's, again, sort of somewhere between fantasy and sci-fi. And the book of hers that really chimed for me was this book, Always Coming Home, which is based in this sort of very distant future, sort of post multiple kind of crises and sort of societal collapses, and it follows this group of people who are living in what used to be the Napa Valley in California. And it's the book is basically like a sort of faux anthropological textbook about these people. Yeah. So I found that sort of fascinating, and it was one of the most unusual books I'd ever read, because it has got stories in it, but it's also the sort of book that you can kind of pick up anywhere, read a bit, and then you don't have to read it in a linear way. It's sort of just this thing you can dip in and out of it and sort of live in it for a bit and then sort of go away. It's weird. It's one of these books I, in some ways, wouldn't say that I enjoyed reading it, because it's sort of hard work in some ways, but when you're not reading the book, you realize the ways in which it's changed your mind, and you realize the ways that it's sort of opened your mind. So I feel like it was one of the most important books that I ever read, and really helped shape the sort of conceptual territory for what I ended up doing with this set of recordings. A lot of those books as well have a kind of main protagonist as well, which in the Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe is this character Severian, who's this sort of journeying torturer, who you, and a kind of unreliable narrator, but someone that you kind of come to feel quite warmly towards. And so that was the sort of inspiration behind me picking a kind of character protagonist for this record. And the name of the protagonist on the record is Green. So it's their atlas, it's their map. It's their sort of annotated map of this future world they're living in. And the idea with the future world that they happen to be in is that it's sort of post some sort of collapse. But we find Green, this musician, living in a world that's not, it's between eras, basically. It's sort of not the world we live in, and it's not quite a sort of full-fledged new world yet. It's a kind of zone of transition where, like, they are sifting through these sort of signposts from the past and trying to understand where they've come from and where they're going. And everything becomes this sort of soup of signs and signifiers, and they're trying to work with fragments of the past to build some sort of map of where they are and where they're going. So it's a sort of very long roundabout answer to where these ideas came from. You know, it was all sort of inspired by literature, really, and particularly, yeah. I mean, those two fantasy books, but yeah, also the work of Federico Campagna, who has this book, Prophetic Culture, which is kind of all about. He sort of thinks we are not at the end of the world, but we're at the end of our world. You know, our sort of time slice, this period of Western modernity is coming to an end because the stories that we have told about what this era is and what it means are starting to not really make sense anymore. Right. So yeah, he has this whole thing about, you know, every era needs a sort of story. It needs a song. It needs something to sort of bind together all of these disparate sensations and disparate ideas and systems that we make in society. You need something that makes a coherent world. And so, yeah, he speaks a lot about it being, he talks about it being a song, but I mean, it's kind of just a sort of a narrative. And yeah, he's someone who's sort of saying we are sort of heading towards a point of change where we're kind of laying the seeds now for what future generations will make of this era and how they will move forward and make a new one. So, you know, in some ways, the album is kind of a bit of a direct response to some of those ideas. Yeah, I certainly found it pretty exciting to read that stuff at the time.
Yeah, no, I mean, that all makes a lot of sense. And I think, like, hearing all that, it makes me appreciate the record even more, because I think you capture that spirit so well, especially like one of the things that, and I think it talks about this in the, you know, the album description or liner notes or whatever, but using like sort of malfunctioning physical media and like glitching gear and stuff as part of the compositional process. I think that it feels like this very, like, this sonic bridge to that idea of things from the past, trying to make sense of it and find a direction ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of them having quite a sort of limited palette, a limited sort of limited set of instruments that they could use. For instance, you know, simply, you know, what might you have in a future that is kind of a bit fucked? You might you might have sort of basic string instruments because they're very simple ideas, and you know, those ideas, those sort of physical models for sound would probably endure. You know, you that would get either get preserved or sort of reinvented. You know, so you'd have sort of string instruments and things like that. You might have also these sort of bits of fragments of sort of broken gear that you would discover and be like, what are these? What are they for? How do they work? And you'd use them in a totally arse backwards way because you'd have no idea what they were. So, you know, part of the idea of Green is that they're sort of an adolescent in a world which is also at a sort of adolescent phase, which is another sort of thing that Federico Campagna talks about, these sort of awkward transitional phases. So I part of the idea behind this sort of instrumentation was like, I wanted to use some of the instruments that I used when I was an awkward adolescent. So, you know, there's guitar on there, there's the 4-track, the cassette 4-track, which is a big part of mine and my brother's kind of teenage years, growing up and learning to play music and try and record it. So I used the 4-track that I've had for years and years and years, but kind of tried to use it in a slightly different way, like I was using these cassette loops, as I mentioned before, and kind of loading each channel of the 4-track up with a bunch of sounds and tones and things like that I could then sort of switch on and off and kind of create these sort of live sort of collages. That's all over the record, that kind of technique. And that came to sort of define the sort of sound world of it a fair bit. I've also got this sort of half-broken harmonium in my studio that is this great big wheezing pile of wood from the late 19th century that sounds amazing, although it's totally out of tune with everything. So there's a fair bit of that on there as well. But yeah, just trying to work with a more limited palette than I have done before, which was kind of a new thing. I mean, it's still fairly diverse. I mean, by a lot of people's standards, but for me, it was a bit more, a bit more sort of tied down. But yeah, I got a lot out of it. Sure.
a great big a pile of wheezing wood that sounds so delightful. I love it. That is, everybody could use a big pile of wheezing wood.
Big pile of wheezing
homes,
wood.
I think.
Well, it's a quarter tone flat, which is slightly less of what you need in your life. I mean, it became very frustrating because if I wanted to play it along with something else that was sort of in tune, it's all right with tape stuff. You know, if you've got a vari-speed thing, it's like, oh, that's kind of fine. You can be between the cracks. But if you want to play with something else, and it required all sorts of bullshit. The kind of bullshit that this musician Green in the future almost certainly would not have been able to do. So that's the that's the conceit there.
Well, we could go down this path forever, and I'm gonna try to keep this from being like a 2-hour long conversation. But I did really like switching gears a little bit. I wanted to ask really quick. You made like I guess I don't know if it's a sample library. You worked with Slate Nash on it's for their instruments, for their cycles thing. I'm just curious how that happened. Like I find that stuff really fascinating. Like I've got a couple other instruments. Like I've got the one Leah Bertucci did recently, and and then one of the other ones. I don't have cycles. I keep.
It's it was like a totally random kind of email a few years ago, and it was a few years ago. I mean, it was maybe 2019 when Simon got in touch. Yeah. Or no, maybe it was the beginning of 2020 because I remember making all of those sounds fairly early on in COVID. And just being like, okay, I guess this is, I'm glad I have something to do. This is good.
Right.
But then they just like, I sort of handed them in, and then just, it was like crickets for about like 4 years. And then randomly, I basically just thought the project was dead. I was like, okay, well, that was a shame. Never mind. And then I got an email being like, right, they're coming out next week. It was like, oh, fuck, okay, great. So, and then they came out, and people seem to actually be using them as well, which is amazing.
That's cool.
Yeah, but yeah, it was kind of a fun. It was kind of a fun job actually, because I don't really use sample packs. I've never really gone down that route, and so it was an unusual thing to think about. You know, you want to give people some tools, but you don't want to give away your best stuff. So you know, it's, but you know, you also want them to be good, because you kind of want people to use them. So it was an interesting, like, practical conundrum. But I ended up sort of thinking about it in terms of like sort of systems composition. Like years ago, I took part in this performance of Terry Riley's In C. Which is this piece of minimalist music where it's all sort of it works with little fragments of music, and everyone who plays it can work through this like set of 50 motifs at their own pace, and they're all written in C, so they all kind of interact and overlap in interesting ways, and it's different every time and all this. It was like kind of a mind-blowing piece of music for me at the time. I was maybe 20 years old, and I was just like, oh my God, this is like a totally different way of thinking of composition. It was more like design, you wouldn't have a sort of absolute control over the way it sounded, but you would basically constrict the parameters in certain ways so that you'd get something that would work but would also surprise you. What an elegant idea. So I sort of like approached the whole thing with making a sample pack with that mindset. I mean, I've since kind of, to be honest, that whole in-C idea is like hugely influenced my entire musical life, but particularly for that Slate Nash thing, I was thinking like, okay, well, I need to make a sort of suite of sounds or a palette of sounds here that are going to be able to work with each other in interesting ways, but I'm not going to know how people are going to use them. So I tried to design them so they'd be complementary, but sort of also contrasting. And thinking about it in a sort of modular way, like how could these jigsaw pieces sort of go together? Well, that's jigsaw piece is the wrong metaphor, because a jigsaw can only go together one way. But like what are the what? How could these things, go together in sort of multiple different ways? And yeah, it ended up being quite a fun project. And yeah, now I get messages from people being like, love the Cycles pack, and they send me a tune they made with it. It's like, wow. And it always cool. Sounds so super different to anything I would have done with them. I've used those sounds a little bit. I mean, at some point I was like, I guess these are never going to get released, so I'll just start using them because they're quite nice. And so I'm a little like sheepish about it now because I know there's a couple of tunes maybe on Atlas Supreme. There's a little bit of it. I think I tried to stay away from anything like that, but there might be a couple of bits of probably fairly unprocessed bits of that sample pack. So yeah, we'll see. But yeah, it was fun to do, and actually, we're meant to be doing a little bit more work together soon. Actually, it's like that. We're meant to be doing like a sort of film live session. So nice. There'll be more from us.
Yeah, I don't know a ton about that world either. Like I've kind of dipped my toe in a little bit, and it was a lot of like seeing artists and friends, like people I'm familiar with doing. Like Leah was a big one because she's done stuff with like Spitfire before, and I was like,
yes, okay.
If like Leah Bertucci's doing like, okay, it's like, okay, I should explore this a little more. And then it kind of like we were talking before we got on here, like Euro rack and modular synth. It's one of those things that is, the rabbit hole is deep, and it is kind of, it can also be a fool's errand because there's too many things to, so I think it's like, if you have a specific thing you're looking for that you maybe don't have access to, it can be useful, but it's like, it can be a lot too.
I think that stuff is super good for, it's great. And I mean, it's super good for if you want to work fast on something, if you want to dial in sounds pretty quickly for, I think that stuff is particularly useful, I think, when you're doing bits of commercial work and things like that. You can just straight away be like, oh, I need to do this kind of thing.
And I've got a deadline.
Basically. And it has which is sort of the opposite of how I worked when I was making the sounds, where it was like all very sort of workmanlike and, sort of from scratch sort of thing. But I think it's super useful to have access to quick sounds, and also the sound design engine in that software is also just very contemporary sounding, so it ends up sounding like quite sort of proper, in a certain type of way,
right.
which is quite useful for a certain type of work. Just before we continue, Brad, I just want to check with you: is my audio recording? Because on my screen, when you speak, it comes up with a little waveform, and when I speak, I don't see a waveform. But maybe that's just me.
It is. I see waveform for both of us on mine.
Okay, so wonderful. That's great. I don't need to see my own waveform.
Sure, but I appreciate you asking, because
I've got it in here.
What a bummer that would be.
Well, it would be a shame to have to try and say all those things again. Anyway,
that happened once. We recorded, we talked for 30 minutes, and I'd forgot to hit record, and it was like, oh, this is a nightmare. Yeah, it was rough. But no. Well, we'll use this as sort of a pathway to get into the whole meat of this thing, and the whole reason that we're here. Maybe not the whole reason, but it's the name of the show. And so, as ever, to start this series of questions off, we will begin with, what is the first song that you remember?
Yeah, so I think it's probably because I grew up in a sort of somewhat Christian household. It was funny, actually. My mum and my dad were both Christian, but they went to different churches and different denominations. It's like, when I look back on it, it's kind of weird, but don't know. I mean, they sort of made it work until they didn't. It's like it was there was a lot of religion around. My granddad lived next door. He's super Irish Catholic. He was always be busting my balls about whether I'd gone to church and all this kind of thing. And I would go to church every week. I would go to church.
I relate to this so much. My grandfather was a preacher, and at a church. It was. And then when I stopped going as a teenager, it was a big ordeal.
Yeah, I mean, I never really admitted to my granddad that I'd stopped going to church. Luckily, by the time I turned 18, he was getting pretty old, so I kind of got away with it. But yeah, I mean, all this to say, the first music I probably remember was it would have been religious music, so probably a hymn.
Yeah.
And I think the hymn that first came to mind when I sort of read that question was "On Eagle's Wings," which is like one of these. I don't know if you know. Have you heard that
I do
song?
know it.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I do know it. Yeah.
It's like it's one of these sort of more modern, in my mind, sort of more modern hymns. Yeah, in my mind, it's Catholic, although I don't know whether the guy who wrote it was Catholic or not. But there was quite a lot of these songs at the church I went to. Not that it was a particularly modern church, really. It was fairly traditional and pretty dull in many ways. But they had a couple of these sort of more like, I think they have a real 70s singer-songwriter feel to them. Some of these hymns.
Yeah.
You know, they almost sound like they almost have a bit of a sort of Laurel Canyon kind of like 70s vibe to them. Like this one in particular, I can kind of imagine like Judy Sill or someone like that singing it.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, even the name of it and like some of the lyrics like fit right into that.
Yeah, well, actually, I just before we started talking, I Googled it just to see when it was written, and it was written in the mid 70s, which checks out. But I noticed that Lana Del Rey had done a cover of it.
Oh, well, there you go. This all tracks.
But it is kind of a beautiful song. I mean, a lot of those hymns from that period have a sort of a sort of melancholic feel.
Yeah.
I think because of the 70s singer-songwriter soft rock thing that they kind of have going on. So I think I remember hearing those songs in church and it being like, it's sort of making me realize that music could affect your emotions, basically, and that music could make you feel a certain way, suddenly make you feel sad or reflective or something like that. And I remember actually also my dad used to play in like sort of, how do you describe it? Little sort of like theatrical productions and things like that, those sort of amateur theater things. He would like play the viola, and so I'd sometimes go along to some of those. And I had a similar sort of quite vivid memory of being a kid and going to one of those and then playing a song, and it being like, oh shit, I feel sad now. And I'm also thinking about, something that happened in school that I don't, that I kind of feel bad about, or that I feel a bit guilty about, or something like, and just like for the first time realizing, oh, this is fucking powerful stuff, Yeah. I don't really understand this shit, like, but it's doing something to me.
Yeah.
And I even when it's making me sad, I'm kind of enjoying it, or it's like, it's making me aware of a space within me that I didn't really know was there before. So I think, my early experiences were probably through either through the church or through these sort of like amateur theater things. I mean, my dad pretty much exclusively listened to classical music. My dad is fucking great, and he's a massive music nerd, but he's also like, he's a pretty square dude, basically. Like to the point where like the reason this is great. The reason my dad doesn't like rock music is because of the bending of the notes, which I think is like probably the squarest reason to not like rock music. Just like he doesn't like it when the pitch passes through, a sort of non-equal temperament. Like, so, I mean, when he told me that, sort of a lot of things clicked into place for me. I was like, right, yeah, okay, kind of checks out.
Yeah.
But
that's amazing.
Having said that, he would occasionally have like quite out there taste in classical music. For the most part, it was fairly sort of conservative. But like I remember when I was fairly young, my dad putting on some Messiaen, some Olivier Messiaen, which is it's pretty out there orchestral music, and like that was, I think, at the cusp of like what my dad could get into, because it's pretty wild, but it's also has a lot of really very powerful moments too. I mean, there's the Triangolila Symphony as one I remember listening to when I was fairly young. I mean, maybe a bit older than Eagle's Wings, but maybe more like sort of 10 or 11 or something, and kind of being like, oh shit, this is like fucking heavy, like It's got a big riff in it. You know, it sounds like fucking. I mean, he was a super Catholic guy too, Messiaen, but
Right.
it sort of sounds like the gates of hell are opening. You know,
Yeah.
it's like it's kind of scary. And I remember my dad playing it to me, and then me going on to we had this little sort of digital piano in the dining room, and I remember going onto the piano and just like sort of trying to copy the sound of this, like, you know, sort of weird scatty piano writing that Messiaen does, and my dad being like, "Yeah, pretty close, nice, pretty close, I like it." I actually remember that as being a time where I was like, "Oh, I feel quite encouraged by that," you know, like, "Oh, maybe, yeah, okay, so maybe I can do something not like the Triangular Symphony. That's not really the way things have worked out." But yeah, that was another sort of early experience with realizing that music was super powerful, you know.
Yeah. Well, and hey, 20, 25, however many years later, here you are.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you know, this stuff is so persistent. I think when the stuff that you hear when you're a kid as well, it really does just stick with you, and you can't ever shake it fully.
Absolutely.
You know, you might try to, and obviously your mind expands, your listening expands, but you never lose it entirely.
No, you know, it's well, speaking of the emotional power of music, what is a song that makes you cry?
So it's relatively easy to make me cry. Not by sort of name calling or taunting or anything like this, but like if I'm, you know, I watch films or just you know, read books or whatever, I'll sort of cry fairly easy. When it comes to music, it's sort of fairly rare that I cry directly at a piece of music, although I'm sure it has happened. But I often this sounds unbearably precious, but like I sometimes will like be moved to tears just sort of thinking about someone's talent. I'll just be like, God, they are so fucking talented. Oh my God. Like they're able to sort of channel such a sort of purity of intent, and you know, it's just quite amazing to me, you know. Actually, I mean, it happens often with Joni Mitchell, where I'll just be like, it's insane to me how connected she is to the sound of music and also the power of words, and how astute she is on finding the words for her emotions. And I'll just sort of think about it and just be like, fuck. It kind of moves me. But in terms of an actual song, I will answer the question. I'm going to go for "I Can't Make You Love Me" by Bonnie Raitt, which is a very beautiful song. It's kind of a soppy song. I mean, but the lyrics are heartbreaking, you know?
Oh, it's like so straightforward and beautiful and just brutal.
Totally. You know, and I think I heard that. Actually, you know what? No, I heard the first time I heard that song. This is the weirdest way to have heard this song, I think. I feel like this song is a bit more of a big deal in America than it is in the UK, by the way.
Probably.
Like, I think, you know, my wife is Canadian, and for her, this is like total canon music. It wasn't so much in the UK, but the way I heard that song first was in an E&E tune called Fire Gut. You know, E&E is like Alicia Crampton's sort of old project.
Oh my God.
You know, this sort of like very hyper emotional, intense collage music. And that tune is built around an a cappella of "I Can't Make You Love Me." And I didn't know that. I just heard the music, and I think that tune is like absolutely insane. It's so it's so modern sounding and so emotional, and it just doesn't really sound like anything else. And I just like, I loved it, but I didn't realize it was Bonnie Raitt. And I think I put it on, and my wife was just like, "Oh, you're listening to the weirdest Bonnie Raitt remix ever." It's like, oh, okay, I didn't know that. And then I listened to the song and fucking loved it, and it became like a bit of a karaoke number for me. I was on tour. I used to play as a session musician for like pop bands and stuff. Well, sort of one in particular, one sort of pop singer. And when we were on tour in the States, maybe, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, and we stopped in Northern California in like a reservation. We were like staying in some like fucking, I don't know, casino hotel or something like this. And they had karaoke on in the bar, and I did that song karaoke, and it was kind of quiet in there, but it was mostly just like older couples sat around. And I did that song, and I feel like I sang it fairly well. But afterwards, it was crazy. Like I had just like all these old couples were like coming up to me at the bar and like thanking me for like,
oh my God,
they were like, this song is like super important for me and my wife. You know, you sang it beautifully. We just want to say thank you so much. Which, like, incredible. To be honest, I found it funny, but also it was kind of making me like tear up a little bit because it was so wholesome. I was just kind of like, oh my God, this is too much. Actually, I have to like leave. But so that song is capable of eliciting a very strong emotional reaction in me. I think also because the lyric is obviously it's this sort of unrequited love thing, but it's also quite powerful to be hearing that from a woman towards a man, or you know, the inference is that it's a man. And I don't know, something about that is a bit more unusual than like, and
right.
There's a real vulnerability to the lyric. And it kind of blows me away. I'm thinking about it now, I'm getting teary. This is what I mean. It's for me, it's when I think about
it. I totally know. I can relate to that. I mean, it's when I saw it on your list, I was, because normally I go and listen to the songs, but I was like, I don't know if I'm in a place to listen to this today. And like, I know the song so well, so I didn't need to. But it, I don't know.
Sorry, Brad.
I think this is the second time
your audio is broken up. Your audio broke up there for a little bit, and you literally sounded like an Alicia Crampton tune for a while.
There we go.
I didn't hear what you said. I'm so sorry.
Wasn't important. Honestly, I was just saying how much I love the song. Basically, that's the gist of it. I don't even remember what I said. Okay, well, on the flip side, what's the song that'll put you in a better mood?
Okay, so I mean, I had a fairly clear answer to this, although, you know, the thing with these questions is, right, I mean, I'm sure everyone feels like this. My answers are so sort of arbitrary. Like, I mean, I don't really have an answer to any of these questions. And in fact, when I started reading the questions, it's like I couldn't think of a single song all of a sudden. You know, it's just like,
what is music? God, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. The national anthem? I don't know. But like, so I did end up getting some answers though, luckily. And for this one, I felt like I had a fairly clear one. It's a song called "Show Me Your Heart" by Need New Body, which is an absolute riot. Great fun, great band from Philadelphia. They put out records on a label which I since found out was actually run by Matt Worth, who runs Revenge. Yeah, because I think I included this tune in a mix for a Revenge thing, and Matt was like, "You know, I put this record out." It's like, what the fuck? And it was like before Revenge. They were like, I think they were basically, Matt was kind of, he was given a label to look after by some guy who'd been running it for years, and Matt sort of took the reins, and this was one of the records they put out. So It's funny the way things sort of come back around.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is a great song. It always puts me in a good mood. In fact, I remember it put me in too good of a mood one time when I was about 18. I was in a relationship with this girl, and I wanted to break up with this girl. And I remember getting the bus into town to go to her place to break up with her, and putting this song on my headphones on the bus on the way, and the song elevated my mood so much. By the time I got off the bus in town, I was just like, we don't need to break up. Everything's fine. She's great. What was I thinking? You know, life is great. So this also has a capacity to be very powerful. So use with discretion. But Yeah, it's like, I mean, I love this band. I mean, they're quite silly, but also like incredibly sophisticated at the same time. They'll alternate on an album between like a sort of like comedy rap song that's sort of objectively terrible, and then like the most sort of beautifully composed sort of like jazz punk kind of um, odyssey. It's like they kind of go all over the place. But the thing I really like about what they do is that it's never quite a sort of pastiche. They kind of make the music their own, and also the way they record the music is very characterful, and that becomes the thing that sort of binds it all together and makes it very them. So yeah, I really love what they do, and I've enjoyed following all the other projects of the members of this band. They're pretty special.
Yeah, I imagine that like I imagine there are people who would absolutely hate this. I like I love it. I think it's great. I think it's like there is sort of an absurdity to it that is so wonderful. Like yeah, and
Yeah.
I think that's what I respond to in it. Is it's like it's kind of whimsical, but there's also but not. I don't know. It doesn't sound like anything else either, which is it's just out there.
Yeah, it's very lighthearted, and yet at the same time clearly quite sort of musically serious in a way. And I do quite appreciate that that combination. But yeah, I mean, if I lent this album to someone and they were like, I hate this, I would get it. Yeah, I would get it.
Yeah.
I mean maybe that, yeah, that actually links with one of my other answers to this quiz as well. We'll talk about that in a bit.
Yeah. Well, before we get to that, let's do everybody's favorite question, which is what is objectively the greatest song of all time?
Okay, so I mean, my answer to this is so embarrassing, but I'm just going to go with it. So, I mean, I should say the way that you framed this question was good. I thought you were like, okay, so obviously it's a hard question to answer, but you were like, if aliens came down and were like, show me what you got, show me like the best song.
Show me what
would you play them? Okay, so that was a good way of framing it. Narrowed my sort of focus a little bit. So, okay, so I'll just get it out of the way. My answer is the Pyramid Song, or Pyramid Song by Radiohead, which is, I'm a bit embarrassed to give a Radiohead song, although it's a great song. I love this song. I'm actually not a massive Radiohead fan particularly, but I think like their best songs are very, very good, I think. And the reason I think that this would be a good song to play to aliens is, I mean, if I'm going to play them something, the first thing they're going to want to know is like, okay, thank you for playing that. Is this something that like people generally like? Like, do a lot of people like this? And if I'm just like, nah, like 20 people bought it on Bandcamp, you know what I mean? they're gonna be like, all right, well, I sort of feels less significant then all of a sudden if you're offering this up as like the best of your your entire culture. So I was like, okay, it's gonna have to be something that's quite popular, but that I still think is very good. So anyway, this song, I mean, the reasons why, I think this song is a song that like a lot of people straight away can kind of understand that this song is quite good. Like, even if they sort of don't love it, they're like, oh, this is quite a beautiful song. And it's kind of accessible in a way. And it has quite basic ingredients, like musically. It's like a piano, some drums, a bass guitar, there's some strings, a voice. So it's very simple in a way, but it retains, no matter how many times you listen to it, it kind of retains a sort of mystery to it. It's quite elusive. You can never, well, I can never, unless you're an absolute like YouTube music nerd, you can never fully sort of get into how it's working rhythmically and stuff like that. I think it's really elusive in that way, and I love that. It also lyrically, I'm really having to justify this choice. It lyrically also is quite, it's like full of very like simple human earthy iconography as well.
Mhm.
It's all sort of jumped in the river. It's angels. It's the moon. It's like these things that I feel like even to an alien would be like, okay, I am familiar with these things. And I've heard of pianos and drums and basses and stuff. But by the end, it's quite grandiose and quite big. I feel like, again, it's one of those things where most people, if they hear it, by the end, they're kind of like, oh, this is like big music. This is like, it's quite stirring stuff. Plus, it's got this whole ancient Egyptian vibe to it, which, I feel like the aliens will dig it. They might be like, yeah, we know. We fucking know.
We know all about pyramids.
We know all about this. We were here a long time ago.
Yeah.
We're just checking in.
If my wife listens to this episode, because she does listen, she's an archaeologist, so I'm just going to apologize straight away. If she...
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah. I'm just saying they maybe helped, not that they didn't do it.
Right,
but, maybe they just oversaw or something like that. Maybe just on an advisory
they did,
board.
Like they had dropped the blueprints out of like their UFO.
Something like that. Yeah. But I feel like, the aliens might be like, okay, cool. We know, even if they had nothing to do with it, maybe as they flew in, they might have been like, oh yeah, we saw those. We were like, they look fucking cool.
That's
actually.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. I can see why you wrote a song about them, because they're great.
Yeah. We're not going to annihilate your world, because pyramids seem to be the main thing here, and we think
important
that's cool.
to you. Yeah. Yeah. So there's my choice. I chose a Radiohead song. Whatever.
Whatever.
Fine.
Hey, I think it's a great song. So I'm not a big Radiohead. Like, I think you are spot on. Like when they're when they're good, they're really good. But there's just, to me, there's a lot more that's forgettable, and that's okay. Because most bands, if they wrote one song like Pyramid Song, it'd be like, I'm good.
Disappeared.
Good for me. All right.
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of their stuff leaves me pretty cold. I mean, and I like a lot of stuff that other people really love, and they'll be like, play me In Rainbows or something. I don't think In Rainbows is very good, but everyone else will be like, oh, that's the best record, So I think there's a certain type of Radiohead song that I really like. And when they do that, I'm like, oh, fucking hell, this is dead.
Yeah.
And a lot of the other stuff, I'm just a bit like, nah.
Yeah. Well, if we haven't upset enough people, what's a song you used to love, but now not so much?
Well, I mean, I don't know if I could pick out a specific song here, but the first thing that came to mind was a band that I went through a phase of really liking when I was probably about 14. Mr. Bungle, which, I mean, even saying the name, I don't even like saying the name. Do you know what I mean? I don't like it. There were things I really liked about them when I first heard them. I mean, when I was a teenager, I was like quite a sort of prog rock nerd. And I really liked that kind of music because it was quite ambitious and kind of like, oh, what can we do with these, sort of basic ingredients, and, where can you sort of take the rock song and all this kind of stuff? Because I'd gotten into playing guitar, and so, you discover the sort of canon rock stuff, and then you're like, oh, where could this go? So I had a real sort of prog rock phase, which, I mean, has kind of stayed with me in many ways. But when I heard Mr. Bungle, I was like, oh, this is kind of that, but through it, you've arrived at it from a different place or whatever. And it had this kind of virtuosity to it, not necessarily like a virtuosity of like shredding, although I guess it kind of has some of that. It was more like a sort of virtuosity of songwriting that I thought was like, oh, that's crazy that you can apply that idea of virtuosity to like just to the sort of nuts and bolts of the songwriting process. So I remember being pretty amazed by that, and also just how sort of vivid it was as music. Like if you're sort of dropped anywhere in a Mr. Bungle song, like every section is so sort of steeped in affect that, you know, it's just very vivid music. So as a teenager, you're just kind of like, oh, wow, this is really a fucking rockabilly section. Oh, this is like really like a sort of doo-wop, sort of dripping sentimental section or whatever. And like everything is sort of turned up. And I think as a teenager, that was just like pretty effective on me. Also, you know, and I would in some ways stand by this. Like, I quite appreciated the fact that it was clearly meant to be kind of fun or like funny or silly or something. It was kind of like, oh, you actually don't get that much in music, and you know, and in some ways for good reason. But like, I think, you know, I've nothing against it inherently. So I think they were the reasons I sort of liked it when I was a kid, and the reasons I don't like it now, well, are probably obvious to most people. But like, I mean, it's Mike Patton, really, isn't it? It's like he's fucking annoying. Like, he's just an annoying guy. He's fucking annoying, and he spoils it. But also more than that, it's like, it's how sort of pastiche it all is, and how ironic it is, and you know, it sort of flattens all of these sort of musical traditions and interesting things about music. It sort of flattens them into this surface level veneer, and you know, they're just flipping through this Rolodex of like stuff, and there's something about that now that feels very 90s and very sort of like smart ass.
Yeah,
it's just annoying. It's just kind of annoying, basically, and like totally lacking in authenticity. Or not so much authenticity, but a kind of earnestness. But I blame Mike Patton for that, really, because I actually sort of think that Trace Bruance is a little bit more of a head. I mean, they're both heads, I guess, but like Trace Bruance, I feel like kind of, he does actually know his shit and is actually quite committed to a lot of different styles of music, particularly like sort of Arabic music and like music from sort of South Asia and stuff. And I feel like he does sort of know his shit on that. And so I do have some respect for him there. Some of the stuff he's done outside of Mr. Bungle is kind of good. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, particularly on that album, California, it's sort of their best and worst album in some ways, because it's sort of, it takes the whole pastiche thing so far, and that kind of makes sense on an album that's sort of like conceptually about California and sort of and how sort of you know, how vapid and surface level a lot of America is, and then particularly California in the 90s and stuff. So I think it's kind of like, in a way, quite an appropriate use of that strategy on that record. But it's also just super annoying, and the songs aren't really about anything. So yeah,
you get no argument from me. I don't know.
I really remember my girlfriend's older brother when I was like 16 or something. My girlfriend's older brother being like, "Oh, are you listening to Mr. Bungle? Yeah, you'll grow out of that." And me being like, "That's such a fucking dickhead thing to say. That's so annoying." But you know, it was totally right. I mean, I did totally grow out of it, and he was right in many ways. But yeah, go on. That's all I've got to say about Mr. Bungle.
I don't have. I totally agree. I never really had a Mr. Bungle phase. I never really got it. And I was like, went and listened to a few things. I think it was like the first time in 20 years I've actually tried or listened to anything by Mr. Bungle, and I was just like, yeah, nope, not for me.
There's kind of no commitment in it beyond being committed to not having commitment. Like it's like they don't sort of, everything is just this thing that they're trying on for a second, and you don't get a sense of much lyrical depth either. There's something very impressive about it in some respects, but yeah, it's not something I listen to very much anymore.
Well, what's something that some group people hate it, you don't care, you love it anyway?
the whole of The Wall by Pink Floyd, which I feel like some people might feel the same way about The Wall as they do about Mr. Bungle, but I think it's fucking great, basically, and I also think it's actually had an enormous effect on my musical thinking, in perhaps slightly unexpected ways. I mean, like, I first heard it because when my parents got divorced, my mum remarried someone who's kind of into rock music, which was, very unusual for me. I was like, what the
Yeah,
fuck?
right.
Someone who's old who likes rock music. I mean, of course they're old and like rock music. It's like the music from their youth. But I was sort of discovering this stuff for the first time, and he liked Pink Floyd, and he gave me a cassette of The Wall, and I got really into it. And I actually listened to it fairly recently on a car trip with my wife, because she also liked Pink Floyd when she was a teenager. And like, so many things about the way that record is structured and put together are like, I'm just like, oh, that's why I like what I like, basically. Like the way things move from one thing into another, the way things are sort of constantly changing into something else. I mean, that record is full of all of these kind of like little interstitial moments in between songs where it's like these kind of concrete elements, like field recordings, quite sort of like out there, minimal synth interludes and things like that. And then these like big tunes. I mean, there's some great rock songs on there. But yeah, I mean, there's a song on there called One of My Turns. And the song, it's just bonkers. It's like, it opens with this sort of field recording of a woman going into someone's apartment and looking around this apartment and being like amazed at how big this apartment is, and looking at all these guitars, and she's just narrating her walking around the apartment, and you can hear in the recording the size of the room and things like that, which I remember as a kid being quite fascinated by. I was like, she's talking about going into a big apartment and it sounds like she's in a big room, and in the background there's like these really paranoid sounding sort of drone synths, and then something will smash or something like this, and then somewhere out of that emerges this like quite glum but sort of pretty synth ballad, kind of comes out of the background of the song all of a sudden, and stuff like that. I'm like, it's fucking brilliant, like in terms of its sort of world building and storytelling. I mean, a lot of people find that album sort of very bloated and kind of pompous or something, and that's sort of true. But on a like structural level, it's fascinating, and like a totally, to my ears, quite different take on prog thing again. I mean, like, because it's not a super virtuosic record instrumentally. I mean, like Dave Gilmour does some ripping solos here and there, but it's sort of not about that. Again, it's like the virtuosity is kind of angled towards the structural and formal elements of the album, and like the way it's put together and how things move from one thing to another, and this story that's being told in a quite sort of oblique, weird way about a kind of protagonist, this protagonist Pink. So I think I realized over time, like, that's actually a pretty special album for me, and pretty influential. It's funny because no one fucking likes it. I mean, I have yet to meet anyone except my wife who's like, yeah, I love that album. I mean, my brother also loves it. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I don't know that I love it, but those interlude, like, I have like a real, I hated it when I was a teenager, because I was like, when I was 15, I was in like punk rock phase, and I had a friend who was constantly trying to get me to listen to Pink Floyd, and I was like, dude, fuck no, I'm punk as
read the
fuck.
room.
Yeah. But as I've gotten, like, especially like the structure of, it's not something I listen to very often, but like, the structure of it, that narrative, and like those in between bits are, it's, I mean, like the One of My Turns, the one you were describing, like, that is, man, what a great track.
It's like, so weird, and it's like, it's not like a main track on the album, but like all of those moments on the record were the ones that really stuck with me. Or there'll be a section where it's like, a glass smashes and then it's a baby crying, And then, an acoustic guitar part comes in, and it's,
Mm-hmm.
you can hear like the sound of birds and bees and things like that. It's just like, fucking hell, I'm in this like place now, and things are happening that are super
Right.
dramatic and are like a bit traumatic. You get this sense that like
Mm-hmm.
this person is like kind of losing their mind a bit, but also having these like quite beautiful epiphanies every sort of 10 minutes or something.
Yeah.
I fucking love it. I'm gonna listen to it after I get off this call. I'm excited about it. So fuck you, everyone else.
Yeah, I might actually have to do that too. Okay, well, on a different tip here, what is the most romantic song? Do you think of yourself as a romantic?
I think in a way, yes. I mean,
Okay.
yes. I am fairly easily moved and fairly willing to be moved, and also relatively committed to the idea of love, and all that entails. But yeah, I think the most romantic song, or the one that came to mind, I mean, again, a lot of these answers, except for The Wall, are sort of arbitrary. But Wild Combination by Arthur Russell. Or, anything by Arthur Russell, really. I mean, I think he really excels at doing this. Like, his stuff is so open-hearted to the point. I mean, it's funny, though, because it's very open-hearted, but also a bit cryptic. And I think that's a wonderful mixture. You have these flashes of very, very lucid emotional depth in his songs. And then the next line will be like, it'll be sort of grammatically totally nonsensical in this way. You still get a feel of it, and he's sort of pushing between this cryptic thing and this like very, very lovey-dovey thing all the time. And a lot of his songs that have been sort of released posthumously as well are kind of quite openly like love letters to his partner. And so I love this stuff. And actually, when me and my wife got married, her mum, my now mother-in-law, sang this tune as like the song.
Oh, wow.
At our little wedding. We had quite a strange wedding. It was all of our friends, and one of my friends, who's absolutely not a priest or someone who's ever done nothing like this, he was sort of the officiant. And the band that I now play in Exeter Island Head, they sort of played us down the aisle. And then halfway through the service, my mother-in-law sang Wild Combination, which is a song she'd never heard before. And she's got like a quite unusual voice. She's got like quite a sort of operatic voice almost. She's also a church person and is kind of like used to like projecting in churches. And so she sang this Arthur Russell song in this super weird way that was like, I think no one had heard her sing before. And I think everyone in the room was quite like, whoa, like that's a mad voice for this song. But it was all the more powerful for it. Like it really worked. It was kind of a moment of genius. It was just like, you have really reinvented this song. And I mean, fucking hell. I should have said, what's the song that makes you cry? This made me cry. Sure. I was basically just crying for about like 3 hours that day. I was sort of in a constant state of tears. And this song was maybe the thing that sort of set me off, actually, because it was very vulnerable, and she was singing it in this way that was like, oh god, that's quite a mad sound, actually. But yeah, it really worked. So yeah, but it could be. I could have said a number of Arthur Russell songs. I mean, he's pretty good at that.
He's I don't know. I think I get kind of emotional anytime I just think about Arthur Russell because
he's another one.
Yeah,
I have a lot of friends who don't like Arthur Russell though, and it's weird.
I know a number of people too, and it always I don't know. I just think
there's nothing you can say.
I've talked about him before on here. Yeah, I mean it's just he seems so like improbable and impossible, and it's like how was he real?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I mean, obviously that documentary did a lot to sort of open his work up for other people. But I mean, I've watched that with people who've at the end of it been like, don't like it, and he seemed like a bit of an asshole. It's like, fucking hell, we've been watching the same film. Jesus. So but that's the power. That's the power of music, baby.
There it is.
Yeah, I love it.
It's show business.
It's showbiz, baby.
All right. Well, what's the song that changed your perspective on an artist, either for better or worse?
I was really on the fence as to whether to do for better or for worse here. Maybe I'll do both. For better was probably Coyote by Joni Mitchell. I mean, because it was sort of the song that like triggered me getting very into Joni Mitchell. I'd heard her music before because I think my mum had I think she maybe had Ladies of the Canyon on CD when we were growing up, and so I'd heard a couple of tunes. I think I'd heard like Big Yellow Taxi and stuff like that, and sort of liked it, but didn't think much of it. And then I think Coyote was the first song where I was like, "Oh shit, this is really deep music," and like is pulling together a lot of things I like. The lyrics on that record, I mean, on that whole record, are amazing, and she does something that I'm often not that interested in, which is these very line by line, almost like traditional storytelling lyrics. She does that incredibly well, I think, because she inserts a number of like mysterious elements into there. I mean, having the main subject of the song called Coyote, which we sort of understand to be some sort of like suitor in a bar or like some sort of guy or whatever. But the sort of mental image of them being a coyote is fucking great to me anyway. I love thinking about it like that, and thinking about this sort of like this kind of lusty dude in a bar that you're kind of having this like weird back and forth with, as being like a kind of animal. I really love that.
That's really great,
But yeah, I mean, her lyrics are amazing, and Jacob Pastorius' bass on there is also is pretty wild. So yeah, that kind of opened up Joni's world for me, and then I discovered everything else and fell in love with it totally.
Well, speaking of lyrics, if it's not Coyote, which I'm sure you could have picked that for this, but what are your favorite lyrics?
This is hard one because I really do love lyrics. The more I get older, the more I love them. But a song that recently I've sort of really appreciated lyrically is a song by Aldous Harding, who's a songwriter I really love. And it's a song called Pilot. And I think all her lyrics are kind of great. I mean, she's able to move from saying something very deep to saying a kind of total non sequitur really, really quickly. And it works. She has a very unusual charisma to her that's like kind of totally unique. She's another person I would get emotional thinking about, because I'm just like, fucking hell, you are such a one-off. You know what I mean? It's amazing. But yeah, the lyrics I really like are in this song Pilot, and it's kind of a whole verse, but it's really the way that it sort of culminates that I love. It's like, I get so anxious I need a tattoo, something binding that hides me, but when the time comes to design it, it opens up like height under a pilot. And I think it opens up like height under a pilot is just a really incredible visual metaphor. And, just the internal structure of that verse and the way the rhyme scheme works, I think is kind of genius. And I love this idea of, the sort of setup for it. Like, I get so anxious I need a tattoo. Something binding that hides me. So it's like you want something that represents you, but you also want something that conceals you. But then when you come to sort of pin down what you want or who you are, you have this sense of vertigo that is just that totally blindsides you. I just think it's very elegant writing, and it opens up like height under a pilot is like. That is something.
Oh my god, that's such an incredible line. That is such an incredible line.
There's something about like I would never say that sentence either. There's something about the word height in there that is an unusual word to use there, but somehow draws your attention to the idea a bit more. Like if it opens up like I don't know, like sky, or opens up like air, or opens up like I don't know, something about it. It's just like I'd never say that, but it works so well. She's a genius, man. She's great.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. What's the song that you can or listen to the most?
Well, the song I probably have listened to the most is King of Rock and Roll by Prefab Sprout. which is a song I like, but the reason I've heard it so many times is not really because of that. I went on tour once when I was maybe 18 or 19, and um, every night of that tour, for whatever reason, the way my playlists were organized, I borrowed an iPod off someone, my friend, because I didn't have anything like that. And oh yeah, have this. So it was all my friends' music that I was listening to at the time, and they didn't have so much stuff that I wanted to listen to. But I discovered that album from Langley Park to Memphis, and I fell asleep most nights on that tour with that song on repeat. Like by mistake, that song just seemed to,
Oh wow.
like whatever playlist I had culminated with that song just being on forever, basically. And so a number of times I'd wake up realizing that for the last like 10 hours or something, I'd just been listening to this song going over and over and over
Oh
and
my
over
god.
again, which for a while really turned me off the song. But I've since
I
it's
can
been sort
imagine.
of rehabilitated for me in the last couple
Wow.
of years,
Yeah.
and I love it. I mean, actually, that's a song that makes me feel pretty happy. I love the lyrics.
Yeah, this was one of my notes here. Is like, this is a song I could list as that'll put me in a better mood. There's the whole song just has like that the vibe of it. I don't even know, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, again, it sort of moves between having these lyrics that are sort of quite profound to like literally just nonsense, which is what the chorus is. Hot
Yeah.
dog jumping frog Albuquerque. But then the opening lyric is great. I think. And what is it? It's like, all my lazy teenage boasts are now high precision ghosts, and they're coming around the tracks to haunt me. It's great.
Yeah,
It's like,
that's a great lyric.
it's slightly needlessly labyrinth like, but
Right.
also like a great sentiment. And he's such a good songwriter. And like, again, just I feel like a running theme of some of these things is people who are able to balance something very sensible or lucid with something daft and kind of a bit silly. I think he does that really well.
Yeah. Have you seen the video for this song? It's so ridiculous. I love it.
It's so ridiculous, and he cuts such an unlikely figure as a pop singer.
I know,
and I like that. I mean, especially now. Have you seen pictures of Paddy McAloon now? He looks like Santa Claus. Like he dresses in this red suit all the time. This like red silk suit, and he has this huge white beard and a big red wide brimmed hat. And he looks absolutely bonkers.
Wow, that's amazing.
Like, he's so sort of erudite and interesting when he's talking. Like he just totally pulls it off. It's hilarious. He's a real inspiration. There's also actually, part of the reason that the character in my upcoming album is called Green is because I'm a big fan of Scritti Politti, and the main songwriter in Scritti Politti is Green Gartside, who was good friends with Paddy McAloon. And there's some really great footage on there's like a documentary about Green Gartside on YouTube where Paddy McAloon is talking about Green Gartside's style of lyric and talking about the types of words that always crop up in Green Gartside's song, how they're kind of these banal words like baby and ooh baby and shit like this, but like how Green manages to kind of like elevate that to like a sort of level of like high art. And I love listening to him talk about music. He's really great. But Green Gartside also a big favorite of mine. Also, part of the other reason that the character is called Green is because Joni Mitchell has this song called Little Green, which is about a kid that she gave up for adoption when she was very young. And me and my wife were sort of talking about whether we were going to have kids, and we decided we were not going to have kids. So naming the character in this album Green is also kind of a nod to that as well, because it's sort of this person that we put into the future, So anyway,
love that. What's the last song you completely fell in love with?
It's undoubtedly something off Clarissa Connelly's record, World of Work, which came out earlier this year on Warp. It's funny, like it seemed to come out of nowhere. I was like dimly aware of an album that she'd done a couple of years ago, and then this one sort of just popped up, and it was on Warp Records, and it was like, oh, weird. They sort of signed this like slightly sort of Celtic infused singer-songwriter. And I checked the album cover as well is hilarious. It's like, I mean, again, it's this combination of very, very serious music and also like quite silly. Because the front cover is like her with this piano, and the piano has been sort of like crudely photoshopped to like have a big mouth. It's
Right.
like about to like bite her or something. It's quite daft, but like sort of also really works. But her music is great. It's like this sort of mixture of kind of like almost slightly medievally like prog, kind of heavy at times, but also very ornate, kind of Kate Bush-esque, and even like a bit Enya-y sort of chamber pop. She's absolutely next level composer. Amazing.
I completely missed this record. I didn't even know it had come out. Like, I remember her record from a few years ago, and then when this was on your list, I was like, "What?" And
yeah,
listened to the whole thing yesterday, and was just like floored.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? There's a particular song, an embroidery, which like it sounds a bit like fucking Tears for Fears or something to begin with. It has like that, that song Head Over Heels by Tears for Fears. It has this sort of like slightly medieval feel to the intro. This song kind of has that too. Yeah, it has a sort of almost 80s singer-songwriter thing to it. But yeah, it also has this like heaviness to it sometimes, and a kind of Celtic medieval sort of feel. Yeah, it's top tier stuff, man.
It's one of those things when you're describing it, because you're describing it in ways that I would describe it. I can imagine somebody who's never heard it being just like, "What the fuck are you talking about?"
Being like, that sounds terrible.
It's like, no, it sounds absurd, but trust me, it really works.
Yeah, it really works. I mean, the reason it works, I think, is just because of the sheer level of conviction that she delivers it with. It's kind of in a way, the opposite of the Bungle thing, where it's like,
I was getting ready to say,
it's real commitment. She's really there with you, and you just get the vibe that it's for real from her. And that goes a long way to sell this like quite outlandish combination of styles. It really holds it all together. And it's funny, like I just haven't seen many people talking about this record, and it blows me away, because I'm just like, it's honestly one of the best records I've heard in years.
I'm ostensibly a quote unquote music journalist, and I had no idea it came out.
And it's on Warp Records, you know what I mean? But I mean, I think,
right.
Do they maybe just sort of sneak these things out sometimes just to be sort of interesting, but not really sort of get behind it that much? I mean, I don't know. I guess it's not, I don't know. I mean, in some ways, maybe it's not an album that's going to go huge, but I don't know. I mean, why not? It's like,
why not?
She's very compelling, and the songs are great, so I don't see why not. But I mean, I don't know anything about what makes things popular.
So you picked a third question here about what a lyric you. I've got to know, like, lyric that you thought it was one thing, you learned it was another, and I gotta know what the lyric is in this song.
Oh yeah, it's just the opening lyric to Another One Bites the Dust by Queen. I mean, Queen were a massive band for me when I was like a young teen, maybe even tween. But yeah, the opening lyric to this song, I just never knew. It's Steve walks warily down the street with his brim pulled way down low. Now, I basically thought this was a song that didn't really have lyrics. You know what I mean? It was just like, scooby-dee-ba-boop. Like, I never considered that there were actually words. Do you know what I mean? And then to think that the opening lyric to this is Steve just feels like wrong somehow.
Steve.
You know what I mean? Steve is the first word we hear in that song. It's a great song, but it just seems somehow kind of wrong. But yeah, blew my mind. And then also, to be honest, it made the lyrics make a lot more sense. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Story checks out.
The song This song has personal significance for me because when my daughter was a baby and we would be getting her dressed, and as when you start singing. So anyway, we had a song that was called Pants that was sung to this. Pants, pants, pants. Let's put on your pants.
Nice. That's great.
And another leg in, and another leg in.
See, that's going to stay with her. You've indoctrinated into the way of Queen at an early age.
Exactly.
The best time.
Someday I'll release an album of children's music, and this will be the hit song.
Oh, Raz, please do. I actually think that would probably do pretty well.
It'd actually be fun. Yeah, probably would. Maybe that's what I should be doing, not this.
I feel like, I feel like Matt Sage might be a good person to hit up for that as well. I feel like he'd probably also be quite good at that.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Maybe we'll see what comes from this.
Collab album.
All right, last two questions. So what is the song that means the most to you? Not necessarily because of the song itself, but because of what you associate it with.
Oh gosh. Yeah, I've actually given you quite a serious answer here. As I should do, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, for me, at least when I answered this question, I thought this was the right answer. Conceptual Romance by Jenny Hval. It's a great song. She's a really great artist, I think. Very interesting, totally unique approach to the whole being a pop star thing. The lyrics to this are, I think, very, very powerful, and they speak to a certain kind of almost like sort of psychopathic like kind of mixture of lust and romance that occurs in a sort of dysfunctional relationship or something. It reminds me of a particular time in my life, which I don't need to go into in any particular depth, but has a sort of a particular resonance for me. But I also just think is a very, very powerful song, very, very powerful lyric, great tune as well. But yeah, she's a very interesting artist, I think, and manages to sort of speak to a lot of very different aspects of the creative life, basically. You know, she's not someone who's writing songs about any one particular thing. She is just a creative person in the world who is sort of documenting how incredibly broad and deep that experience is in songs, and somehow manages to do that, which is very hard to do. So I would go with that.
Well, at this moment in time, anyway, what's your favorite song?
Probably going back to Prefab Sprout, who, like, I mean, there's a lot of Prefab Sprout songs I could choose for this, I think, but I'm going to go with Nightingales, which is it maybe the last tune, or maybe it's the last tune on the first side of From Langley Park to Memphis. It's just gorgeous. I mean, it's he has this sort of way of, like, he's clearly, like, very into sort of like the Great American Songbook and sort of Cole Porter and these kind of like quite sort of lush, sort of show tuney songs, and this is kind of one of them. It's got like an incredibly beautiful chord progression in it, which sort of just feels like it's always lifting all the time, seems to be sort of going up. You never quite get a sense of where it repeats. It's like really nicely written. It also has a really great MIDI harmonica solo by Stevie Wonder on it.
Yes.
At a time where I feel like it was almost obligatory to have a MIDI harmonica solo by Stevie Wonder. I feel like he's just doing it all the time. But yeah, it's a great song. I think I saw Nick Zanka doing a cover of it on YouTube one time and was like,
"Oh wow,
I'm gonna do that." And then I made my own version of it during COVID, and learning to play. I really very, very rarely will learn to play someone else's song, but I think it's a really good thing to do. I should do it more. And I did it with that song, and it really helped me appreciate how incredibly beautiful and well written it is. It's got some great lyrics in it as well. Okay, and again,
Yeah.
kind of weird, like, you know, there's a lyric about cats just randomly in there, and like he sings the word cats in this like totally bonkers way. He'll suddenly he's singing normally, and he'll just be like, "We're all cats." Like this big reverb will open up. It's like, the fuck are you thinking? It's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of absurd, but like the lyrics are pretty beautiful. I'm also a bird guy, so any kind of lyric that references birds, I'm all over it. So
I'm a big bird guy myself, so I can totally relate to that.
Good.
Love, yeah. My mom has become a bird person, like in the last few years. She like has this extravagant feeding pattern for all the birds in her yard. Like she's like going out at different times of the day with different foods, and
oh shit, no way.
It's cool. I mean, it's like, when you're in your 70s, why not?
Why not? Like, totally. I mean, it feels like I mean, I'm in the process of now doing exactly the same thing, but it felt like people of my parents' generation seem to know, just all of them seem to know the names of birds, the names of trees, and the names of plants. Like it was somehow just this archaic knowledge that they all were taught at some point. It's not. It's just living life for a bit longer. And now I'm at that point where I'm like, I know all the birds and I know all the plants, and I'm kind of like just absorbing this knowledge. My stepdad's super into it as well, and this is great. This is the last little thing I tell you. Last time I went to go and visit, if you go and visit your parents, I don't know if you have this experience where they'll get you to fix all their tech problems. I feel like it's a fairly common experience. And so when I got there, he was like, "Oh, Andrew, like I need to ask you to do a few things because I've been struggling with this bird camera that I bought. It's for the yard, and it's like a sort of motion triggered bird camera. Yeah, great idea. Makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of these things on the market, but he got one, and it records onto a little SD card. And he was like, the SD card keeps filling up, and then I keep putting it in the computer to get the videos off it, and they just the SD cards, they just don't come out again. They're just the computer is just swallowing them." And I was like, "That's impossible. That's not a thing. Like computers can't eat things. What are you talking about?" And he was like, "Well, I'm telling you, I've gone through about 10 of these cards, and the computer just keeps chewing them up." I was like, "Okay, this give me a look. Like, what's going on here?" Went into his computer room. He's got this sort of like PC tower, and he gives me a SD card to try. And I realize as I'm putting it in, instantly realize what's been going on. And basically, my stepdad, every time he puts the SD card in, there's like a very, very small gap in the chassis between where the SD card goes in and where the actual metalwork of the chassis goes in. And what he's been doing 10 times is putting this SD card in and wedging it between the chassis of the PC tower and like where the SD card goes in, and then just dropping it. And it's just like, I opened the side of this PC tower, and there was just like a stack of SD cards were like covered in dust that had just been like building up. Absolutely insane behavior from a man who's other than that, like a pretty intelligent dude. Absolutely bonkers stuff. So he would be probably more knowledgeable about birds if he'd actually seen any of the videos that he's taken of them, but they're all languishing on the bottom of his PC tower.
Collecting dust.
Yeah, absolute next level boomer technology behavior.
Well,
it gave me a laugh.
To bring it all back around, somewhere in the distant future, when someone finds that PC, they're going to find these little cards, and they're going to be like, well, "What the fuck is this thing?" And then
these pieces of plastic seem to be very important to this one man. Yeah. What does it all mean?
Well, this was an absolute blast. Thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, totally, Brad. That was loads of fun. I really enjoyed that.
And everybody, Atlas of Green, as out on September 20th, Revenge International. Go listen to it.
Awesome.
Immediately. Once again, thank you to Dialect, Andrew P.M. Hunt. It was fun. We got into it. Created some moments. I don't know. Anyway, Atlas of Green is out on September 20th via Revenge. It's freaking awesome record. If you're a fan of the show, a fan of Foxy Digitalis, you will be a fan of this record. And as ever, you can listen to all his picks, the playlist. There's a link in the show notes. And lastly, as always, I will ask that if you enjoy this episode or this show, or you just think, support what this is doing, like leave a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. Boost this motherfucker in the algorithm, That's what we're trying to do. And if you really, really extra like it, you can join the Patreon, patreon.com/FoxyDigitalis. For as little as $3 or $5 a month, you get these episodes early. You get the unedited, unabridged conversation because there's a whole section that is only on Patreon. And yeah, but if that's not for you, take those few bucks, buy a copy of Atlas Green, and keep on listening with whatever the hell you want.